Hello everyone, I'm back with a new video on reading in relation to literature by Lafcadio Hearne. Lafcadio Hearne is a Japanese writer and translator, and in many of his works has written about Japanese culture. On reading in relation to literature is a speech delivered by Lafcadio Hearne that forms the first chapter of the book Life in Literature. The speech gives you certain ideas about what reading is and what makes a book great and distinct from other books. So let's go into detail. The speech can be divided into two parts. In the first part, he defines reading, and in the second part, he talks about the classics of literature or the great books of literature. We may think that when we are asked what is reading, it is so simple a question. But here, through this speech, Hearne says that only a few people know how to read or what actual reading is. And here's that it is almost impossible to learn how to read. And the process of reading that we see around us or that we practice ourselves is a mere mechanism of reading, that is, reading automatically without proper understanding. And this is actually only a process carried out for amusement, for getting the story, for pleasure, for killing time, or for getting an overall idea. And this is clear when a man who has read a book fails to explain what is in that book. We know that we read a scientific book in a detailed manner, and Hearne says that every book should be read in a detailed manner just like we read a scientific book. And this is called the hard study, and it is not the mere reading for amusement. Every book has its own value, and literary works are also scientific as it is composed of different sciences. Moreover, it has the science of life, science of philosophy, and so on. Hearne exposes a fact now. Out of 1,000 books published in a year, only few books are being read, and people prefer the books which are written in their mother tongues rather than foreign languages. And the fact is that even the books written in one's mother tongue are not being correctly read. And as people read for mere amusement, they select such books that offer just pleasure. And they are not giving value to the content of the books. As the readers prefer books of amusement, there is a tendency among the writers to write and publish the books that offer just amusement and pleasure. And that profits them too, as they can publish more books a year because it is easy for a writer to make books for amusement rather than books of content. And now Hearne advises us that a book should not be read for amusement. Such reading is entertained for those who are incapable of appreciating the deeper qualities of great literature. And once we cultivate the habit of studying a text, it becomes impossible for you to read for amusement. Then we'll only love to read and study and analyze the text. And you have to keep in mind that reading for amusement is a dangerous addiction. Just like a narcotic, it destroys the capacity of thought and it restricts one from developing oneself. He then narrates the example of a man who reads novels while he travels to and back from the office. He may read as many books he can, but he cannot find the value in them, and he cannot remember even the titles of the book he has read. And the result of such kind of reading is just a cloudiness. And you may not be having any kind of benefits from such readings other than passing of time. The next thing to note is that the way of reading matters more than the book you select. And we know that there is no book which has nothing valuable in it. And as we have already told, each book has its own value. Hearne states that a child's reading is the best kind of reading. He reads and reads and reads slowly until he understands it without tiring. He will frame questions about the book himself, and he will find out the answers of those questions. And the result of such reading is a complete understanding of that text. Now let's take the case of a professional reader. A professional reader is the one who is appointed in libraries, publishing houses, or universities. And it is noticed that a professional reader also exhibits the same mode of reading just like a child. He reads and analyzes a text, framing questions and answering these questions. He has the capacity within him to find out those 16 valuable books among the 16,000 books. And finally, he will reach 2 or 3 books which are worth. While he tries to reproduce those books, he may fail to remember some of them and he may mark them as useless. On the third reading of such great selected books, everything is judged: subject, execution, thought, and literary quality. Unfortunately, not all the texts are evaluated the same way. They are just valued on the basis of the reception of the public, whether the public likes it or not. But it's ironic to note that the public actually goes for a wrong book. As we have already seen, a good reader or a scholar reads like a child, thinking in all directions. Every child is a good reader, and one develops the bad reading when one grows. It is also important to note that one should not waste time in reading an unworthy book or even to find which book is to be selected. After all, a good reader knows the value of a book before reading it. How can we call or evaluate a book great? The greatest critic is the public of different generations. If a book is claimed to be the best by different generations, it will be really best. Don't feel bad even if finding any kind of genius in the books claimed to be classics when you read it for the first time. You will gradually feel the magic of the book in your further readings. In fact, we all are not capable of understanding the magic of a text at our first glance. But we cannot consider the opinion of a single reader to evaluate a book. A single reader's opinion refers to his subjective and personal opinion. Now he talks about another way of evaluating a book. He says that if you want to read a book for the second time, then the book is valuable. It is true that no one will dare to read a book that is quite useless. A great book grows exactly in proportion to the growth of the reader's mind, which means that the same book that has given you just a trivial meaning at your childhood can offer you a better knowledge at your youth. Take for example the books of the writer Goethe. For children, his books are mere stories, fairy tales, or fantasies. But for a young man, it is a more serious book, and the middle-aged man can find an extraordinary depth in them. And finally, an old man may find the world of philosophy, the world of wisdom in the books of Goethe. Now look how a book undergoes transformation through different ages of readers. Often, such great works are written by writers who are not even conscious about their own genius. Consider the Book of Job, which is still celebrated, though the concepts in it about the sky and universe are limited. This is only because of the power and genius of the book. He then gives the example of Daphnis and Chloe, which is a little story that tells in simplest language how a boy and a girl fell in love with each other and about all the little innocent things that they said to each other. Though the story is so simple, it is translated into every language in the world. Still, it is read like a new story as it teaches a few true and tender things about innocence and the feeling of youth. All this happens because the theme of the story is universal and is widely accepted. Another example is Manon, which tells the history of a student who had been charmed by a wanton woman and led by her into many scenes of disgrace and pain. Though the story describes a society of a vanished time, a time when everything was different from the life of today, the story is still significant because the story is as true as any other story in the time of civilization. Then he talks about the stories of Hans Anders. He shares moral truths and social philosophy through fairy tales. Though his stories about the mermaids are big and unreal, the emotions of unselfishness, love, and loyalty which the story expresses are immortal. When thinking about listing out certain great books, he says that it is impossible to make such a list because choices differ from person to person. We can find many such lists. The list made by Sir John Lubbock may not be the same made by another man. Now, according to Lafcadio Hearne, 3 groups of text come under the great books. First is the sacred text, then the epic poems, and then comes drama. Then he states that we should have a great knowledge on Greek literature for analyzing English literature as both are linked. We know that in English literature there are frequent references to Greek and Latin literature. And a good knowledge of Greek mythology is obtained through engravings, pictures, coins, statues, and so on. And he gives us an alternative to Greek mythology. It is Kate Lee's Mythology of Ancient Greece and Italy. Now let's look which all books he considers under the title Classics. Goethe's Faust, then the poems of Heine, then as we all know the works of Shakespeare, then comes the works of Molière, Then the ever great work Montevideo by Thomas Malory. He also suggests Milton's works, but he warns that unless one intends to make a certain special studies of language, you should not read them, as without knowing Greek and Latin literature, one will not understand Milton. And he adds that if you can read the original text, you should not go for the translations, because most of the translations lack the essence of the original text. And in some cases, you should avoid the translations completely. Now I have come to the conclusion of the speech, and he concludes by saying that whenever you hear of a new book being published, read an old one. By this statement, he simply means that you have to read a lot. We know that each day thousands of books are being published, and whenever a book is published, you should read. By which he means that every moment you should be having that habit of reading. But you should not go before that new books, but you should go for old classics. So now let me conclude my video. Thank you.